under the soft silver light of the early moon. The air was cool, scented with pine and the faint sweetness of wild jasmine. Every step I took pressed softly into the damp earth, and the sound of my sandals merged with the rhythm of the wind brushing through the bamboo. It felt as though the night itself was breathing, slow, deep, and calm. I had come here many years ago, a restless traveler searching for peace I could not name. The monks had welcomed me without words, only a smile, a gesture toward a cup of tea, and a space to sit. Since then, silence had been my greatest teacher. Tonight, as I walked, I could feel that silence speaking again, a whisper beneath the wind, asking me to listen more deeply than before. The breeze moved gently across my face, and for a moment I imagined it was alive, not merely air, but an ancient voice carrying the memory of the earth. It seemed to say, "Be still, and you will hear the truth." My breath lingered in the quiet. Even the leaves had paused their trembling, as if they too were listening. Far down the valley, I could see the dim light of the village. Life continued, their laughter, fire, the sound of children calling one another home. But up here, there was only stillness. The monastery behind me was asleep. The world around me was a sacred hush. I closed my eyes and listened again. The whispering breeze moved through my robes and carried with it a story, not one written in words, but in the movement of air, in the softness of each passing moment. I remembered my first night here. I could not sleep. My thoughts had been a storm, worries, memories, desires, all crashing inside my head. I had gone outside, just like this, hoping that the mountain air might calm me. That night, an old monk had found me sitting beneath the great cedar tree. He did not speak. He only sat beside me for a long time. When he finally did, he said quietly, "Listen to the wind. It has been here longer than your sorrow." Then he left, and I stayed, not understanding what he meant. But tonight, I finally did. The wind knows no beginning or end. It moves freely, carrying nothing, yet touching everything. When I breathe it in, it becomes part of me. When I breathe out, it continues on its way. How foolish I had been to think that peace was something to be found. Peace had always been flowing through me like the wind, waiting for me to notice. I began to walk again, slower this time. Each step felt lighter, almost as if I were walking inside a dream. The moon followed me through the branches, and my shadow swayed softly across the path. I heard the faint sound of a stream nearby, trickling over stones. Its gentle murmur joined with the wind, creating a melody that was both old and new, a lullaby for the heart. I knelt beside the stream and dipped my hand into the cool water. Ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection of the moon. For a moment, I watched as the image wavered, Then slowly, the water grew still again. The moon returned, whole and silent. That simple sight felt like a teaching in itself. When the mind is disturbed, truth appears broken. When the mind becomes still, everything returns to its natural shape. I sat there for a long time, listening. The breeze moved through the reeds, whispering secrets I could not understand with words, but could feel deep in my chest. My heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of the wind. In that moment, I was not the listener. I was the listening itself. The boundaries between me and the world seemed to dissolve. There was only breath, air, motion, and quiet. In the distance, a night bird called once and then fell silent. Even the crickets seemed to pause between their songs. It felt as though the entire mountain had drawn a single, slow breath. I thought about how much of my life had been spent running, chasing dreams, fleeing pain, seeking answers. Yet here, in the stillness of this whispering breeze, everything I had ever searched for seemed to be already present. The air on my skin, the steady beat of my heart, the moon's soft glow, all of it was enough. The thought came to me like the voice of the old monk. When you stop seeking, the path appears beneath your feet. I smiled, though no one was there to see. The wind moved again, lifting the edge of my robe, almost playfully. As if approving of the realization, I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I could feel my thoughts scatter like dust in the air, dissolving into the vastness around me. I was no longer thinking, I was simply being. The mountain, the sky, the breeze, all were within me, and I within them. As the night deepened, I felt the first hint of drowsiness pulling at my eyes. The wind seemed softer now, its whispers slower, like a mother humming to a child. I leaned back against the trunk of a tree, feeling the rough bark press into my shoulders. My eyes closed, but my awareness remained gently awake, not thinking, not dreaming, only resting in stillness. I could feel the breeze move once more across my face, carrying with it the scent of cedar and earth. It circled around me as if wrapping me in an invisible blanket. My breathing grew slower, deeper. Time felt meaningless. The rustling leaves above became like distant waves, rising and falling in perfect harmony with my breath. For a brief moment, I thought I heard words within the wind, not spoken aloud, but felt in the quiet of my heart. You are safe. You are seen. You are home. A tear rolled down my cheek, though I did not know why. Perhaps it was gratitude, or release, or simply the realization that peace had never left me. It was here all along, in the space between breaths. In the whispering of the breeze, the stars above shimmered faintly, like 1,000 tiny lanterns floating in the dark sea of the sky. The night was wide and endless, yet I felt no fear, no loneliness. Everything was connected by the same invisible thread of silence. My head rested against the tree trunk. The sounds around me became softer. The stream's murmur fading into the distance. The wind turning into a tender hush. I let myself drift into the rhythm of it all, my consciousness floating between waking and sleep, before I finally surrendered to rest. One final thought came gentle and clear. The world does not ask you to be more. It only asks you to be still. The whispering breeze answered, brushing across my face one last time. And in that quiet, I drifted not away, but inward into a place where nothing stirred, and everything was at peace. When the morning bell echoed through the valley, I was already awake. The faint chime drifted through the air like a thread of light, weaving through mist and pine until it reached my small cell. For a long moment, I lay still, watching the soft glow of dawn slip across the paper wall. The world outside was hushed, the kind of silence that feels sacred, as if the earth itself were pausing to breathe. I rose, folded my blanket, and stepped outside. The cool air touched my skin, carrying the scent of wet grass and incense. The path to the pond wound through the monastery gardens. The dew clung to the moss-covered stones, and each step I took made the faintest sound, almost like the whisper of a memory. Birds stirred in the branches above me, their quiet songs greeting the new light. The pond lay at the edge of the forest, a mirror of still water, perfectly round, like a piece of sky fallen to the earth. I had come here every morning since I took my vows. It had become a part of my ritual, though I never fully understood why. When I reached the pond, I sat on the smooth rock at its edge and gazed into the water. Mist hovered over the surface, soft and pale, like breath in the cold. Beneath it, I could see the faint reflection of the mountains and a sliver of the rising sun. I dipped my hand in, and tiny ripples spread outward, bending the world's reflection into rippling lines. Then, as the motion faded, the pond returned to perfect stillness again. I often wondered why the pond had such power over me. It was, after all, just water, clear, unmoving, ordinary. But when I looked into it, I felt as though I were looking into the truth of things. The surface mirrored not only the sky, but also my mind. Every ripple I made was like a thought, a disturbance that broke the reflection. When my thoughts stilled, the reflection, it was as though the pond was teaching me what no words could. That peace is not created. It is revealed when the mind becomes quiet. Years ago, when I first arrived at the monastery, I was far from quiet. My mind had been a storm, filled with regrets and questions. I remember sitting here on my first morning, trying to meditate and failing miserably. My thoughts wouldn't stop. I felt like a fool, staring at the water while my heart raced with memories of things I couldn't change. I had run from my life, from my mistakes, from everything I thought I was. Yet here, surrounded by monks who seemed to move with effortless grace, I was a restless shadow among stillness. It was then that the old master appeared behind me. He was thin and quiet, his steps so soft that I hadn't heard him approach. Without saying anything, he sat beside me and looked out over the pond. For a long time, we sat in silence. The breeze moved through the bamboo. A few petals drifted across the water. Then, in his soft, deliberate voice, he said, "When the pond is stirred, the reflection disappears, but the sky above never leaves. You only think it has." At the time, I didn't understand. I nodded politely, but his words felt like a riddle meant for someone wiser. Yet, over the years, as I returned to this same place again and again, those words began to unfold within me like a slow-blooming flower. Today, as I sat there, I could almost feel the presence of that old master beside me again. The pond was perfectly still, reflecting the world with such clarity that I felt as though I could fall into it. The surface shimmered faintly with light, and in that reflection, I saw my own face, calm, older, lined by the years, but softer somehow. There was a peace there I had never seen before. I leaned closer, studying the image. My reflection blinked, and for a moment, I imagined I saw not myself, but the young man I used to be, frightened, impatient, yearning. He looked at me from within the water, his eyes full of questions. I smiled at him. "You can rest now," I whispered. "You don't need to keep searching." The reflection rippled faintly, and when it stilled again, only the sky remained. Behind me, I heard the faint crunch of gravel. A novice monk approached, bowing quietly before speaking. "Master," he said softly, "the abbot wishes to see you after morning prayers." His voice was nervous. He was new here, his head freshly shaved, his eyes wide with uncertainty. I nodded and gestured for him to sit beside me. "Tell me," I said, "what do you see when you look at the pond?" He looked uncertain. "I see my face, Master," he replied after a moment, "and the sky, and the trees. Do you see the bottom of the pond?" He shook his head. "No, the reflection hides it." I picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the water. Circles rippled outward, breaking the image into fragments. "Now, what do you see?" "Only the ripples," he said, frowning slightly. I smiled. "That is your mind, always chasing the ripples. When you stop trying to see, you will see everything." He stared at the water for a while. perhaps not fully understanding. I did not expect him to. Wisdom cannot be taught through words. It must unfold in silence through time. The boy bowed again and left, his robes brushing softly against the path. I remained there, watching as the last of the ripples faded, and the reflection returned. A dragonfly hovered above the water, its wings glinting like glass. For a brief instant, its shadow crossed my reflection, merging us together. The sound of the morning bell came again from the monastery, slow, measured, infinite. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash through me. In that moment, the distinction between the sound and silence vanished. I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. The pond, the wind, the bell, my heartbeat, all of it was the same rhythm, the same pulse of life that moved through every being. The memory of my former restlessness returned, the way I had once clung to everything, every desire and fear. How small those struggles seemed now, like dust caught in sunlight. The pond had taught me without words. To find stillness, I did not need to escape the world. I needed only to let go of the thought that the world was separate from me. As the sun rose higher, light spilled over the trees and turned the pond into a pool of gold. Tiny ripples caught the light, flashing briefly like jewels before dissolving back into stillness. I thought again of the Master's words, "The sky never leaves." It was true. No matter how many ripples disturbed the surface, the reflection always returned. So too does peace return when the heart releases its grasp. I began to understand that stillness is not the absence of movement, but the awareness within it. Even as the breeze stirred the water, the deeper pond beneath remained calm. The surface danced, but the depths did not move. That was the secret. Life would always ripple. Thoughts would always come and go. But the stillness beneath that sacred silence was untouched. I rose slowly, my knees stiff from sitting. As I stood, I bowed to the pond, a gesture of gratitude for its quiet teaching. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the mountains more clearly. They stood tall and unmoving, as if they, too, were guardians of silence. On the way back to the monastery, I walked past the bamboo grove. The stalks swayed gently, whispering in unison. Their sound reminded me of water, the same rhythm, the same softness. Everything in nature seemed to move to the same invisible music. Even my heartbeat, slow and steady, was part of that song. When I entered the prayer hall, the other monks were already seated. The incense smoke curled upward, delicate and translucent, like a spirit rising. As we began to chant, my voice joined theirs, not as something separate, but as one thread in a vast fabric of sound. The chant flowed over me, through me, around me, until I no longer knew whether I was the one chanting or the one being chanted through. After the prayer ended, I sat for a moment longer. The echo of our voices still lingered in the air, blending with the faint murmur of the wind outside. I felt a calmness that was beyond emotion, not joy, not serenity, but something deeper, something wordless. Later, when I returned to the pond at dusk, the water was again perfectly still. The moon had risen, its reflection gleaming like a silver coin. I knelt down and watched as a single leaf drifted onto the surface, sending out gentle ripples that slowly disappeared. I thought about the cycle of things, day and night, sound and silence, life and death. Everything moved in circles, yet the stillness beneath it all remained unchanged. Perhaps that was what enlightenment truly was. Not a destination, but the simple recognition that the pond has always been still, even when it moves. The breeze touched my face, cool and tender, and I closed my eyes. I could feel the same quiet pulse I had felt in the morning, the deep heartbeat of the world itself. Somewhere within that silence, I heard a faint voice, like the echo of my old master's wisdom. The water does not try to be still. It simply ceases to move. And with that understanding, I exhaled. My thoughts fell away like petals, one by one, until there was only breath, reflection, and silence. The pond, the sky, and I, all one stillness. Forever untouched, the morning light fell across the stone path like liquid gold, breaking through the branches in long, soft streams. I could feel the warmth on my face, though the air was still cool enough to see my breath. The monastery was slowly waking, the faint sound of a wooden bell, the rustle of robes, the distant chanting that rose and faded like the tide. I adjusted my shawl, took a deep breath, and began my daily walk through the forest. The path I followed was narrow, winding gently down the hill. Every stone beneath my feet was smooth from centuries of footsteps. Monks, wanderers, seekers, all walking this same quiet way. I had walked it every day for years, yet each morning it felt new, as though the earth had rearranged itself while I slept. The world here never hurried. Even the breeze moved with care, brushing softly against the leaves as if afraid to wake them. The rhythm of walking had become my meditation. With each step, I breathe in, then out, letting go of the remnants of thought that clung to me. The simple act of moving forward without purpose brought an odd kind of clarity. I was not walking to arrive anywhere. I was walking simply to walk, to feel the earth beneath me, to listen to the sound of gravel and birds and breath. That was enough. The forest deepened as I went. Sunlight scattered through the bamboo, creating patterns that danced across the ground. The scent of earth and dew mixed with the faint sweetness of blooming lilies. My robes brushed against the grass, and tiny insects lifted into the air, their wings catching the light. Every detail felt alive, and yet completely at peace. Once, I would have hurried down this path, lost in thought about where I needed to go or what I had to do. I had lived much of my life like that, running without knowing what I was chasing. Even after I came to the monastery, I often found myself walking quickly, as though enlightenment were a destination waiting at the end of the road. But over time, the forest itself began to teach me otherwise. There was an old saying among the monks, "Walk as though your feet are kissing the earth." I used to think it was a metaphor for gentleness, but now I understand it differently. When your steps are soft, when your heart is quiet, you begin to feel the world responding. The earth no longer feels separate beneath you. It becomes part of your breath, your heartbeat, your being. I slowed my pace, letting my sandals make almost no sound. Each movement became deliberate. One step, one breath, one moment. In that slowness, the world opened. I began to notice things I had always missed before. The faint shimmer of spider silk stretched between two leaves. The subtle rhythm of bamboo creaking with the wind. The hush of distant water. I came upon a small clearing where a stone lantern stood, half covered in moss. It had likely been there for hundreds of years, placed by monks long before my time. Its shape was simple, but elegant, weathered, imperfect, beautiful. I paused beside it, running my fingers along the rough surface. A dragonfly rested on top, perfectly still. For a long time, I watched it, wondering if it too was meditating. There was something sacred in that stillness, the way life moved and rested at the same time. I felt a quiet smile rise within me. Perhaps the path itself was the teacher, showing me what no sutra could. Further down, the forest opened into a wide glade, where the morning light poured in freely. In the center stood an ancient tree, its trunk wide enough for 3 men to encircle it. I approached it slowly and pressed my palm against the bark. It felt cool and steady beneath my hand, as though it had gathered centuries of calm. Birds nested in its branches, their tiny voices weaving through the rustle of leaves. As I stood there, a memory came to me of my early days at the monastery. I had been assigned to sweep this path every morning. I had resented the task, thinking it menial, unworthy of a seeker. Each day, I had swept with impatience, eager to finish and move on to what I thought was real practice. But one morning, an elder monk had stopped beside me and said gently, "When you sweep, just sweep." Then he walked away. At the time, I didn't understand. The path had been teaching me all along the same lesson I am still learning. That peace is not found by reaching for it. Peace appears in the smallest act when the heart is fully present. Whether it is sweeping, walking, breathing, or simply being, that is where awakening lives. I began walking again, even slower now. The sound of my steps merged with the whisper of wind and the hum of unseen insects. The forest seemed to breathe with me. Inhale, exhale, silence. Everything moved in perfect harmony. My thoughts faded into the background, like mist disappearing under the sun. At one point, I reached a bend in the path that overlooked the valley. Below, the river wound its way through the fields, glinting like silver under the morning sun. Tiny houses dotted the land, the village still waking, smoke rising from their chimneys. Watching it from here, it felt like another world, distant yet deeply familiar. I sat on a large flat stone and closed my eyes. The wind touched my face, soft and cool. My breath slowed until it felt as though I were no longer breathing on my own. The forest was breathing for me. I could hear the sound of my heart blending with the rustle of leaves, the song of birds, the faraway trickle of water. It was as if everything that was separate had dissolved into one great, quiet rhythm. In that silence, I remembered a question I had once asked my teacher years ago. Master, how will I know when I have truly found peace? He had smiled and replied, when you stop asking the question. At the time, I had thought it was a riddle. But sitting there on the stone, surrounded by the music of life, I finally understood. The question itself was born of the mind that still sought. When there is no seeking, there is no question, and that is peace. I opened my eyes and looked down at my feet. Dust from the path clung to my sandals, and sunlight made them glow faintly. I thought of all the monks who had walked this same way before me, their steps slowly shaping this road through centuries. Each one had carried their own burdens, their own doubts, their own hopes, and yet the path had carried them all the same. Now it was carrying me. I continued walking until I came to a small wooden bridge that crossed a stream. The water below was clear and shallow, moving gently over smooth stones. I leaned on the railing, watching as fallen petals floated downstream. They spun slowly, catching the light before vanishing around the bend. The sight was strangely comforting, a quiet reminder that everything moves at its own pace and nothing truly disappears. I thought of my own life, of all the things I had clung to, the ambitions, the fears, the memories. How many had already floated away without my noticing? How many more would pass, leaving behind nothing but the trace of their reflection? The sound of the stream merged with the wind, creating a melody that felt both eternal and fleeting. I closed my eyes again, letting it wash through me. My body relaxed, my breath deepened, and for a moment, there was no sense of self at all. Only the soft movement of life passing through life. When I opened my eyes, I noticed a small child standing on the other side of the bridge. She was from the nearby village, carrying a bundle of firewood. She stopped and stared at me curiously, perhaps wondering why an old monk was simply standing there, doing nothing. I smiled at her. She hesitated, then smiled back, a small, shy smile, before continuing on her way. Her footsteps faded into the trees. That brief moment felt like a teaching in itself. No words, no effort, just a shared recognition of being alive. Sometimes, the simplest encounters carry the deepest truths. As the sun began to climb higher, the forest shimmered with light. The air grew warmer, and the smell of pine deepened. I could feel sweat on my brow, but I didn't mind. The body was tired, but the mind was clear, open, wide, unbound. I realized then that enlightenment was not a place to reach, nor a vision to attain. It was already here, in the slow, steady rhythm of walking, breathing, being. I walked until the sound of the monastery bell reached me again, faint but unmistakable. It was time to return. I turned back, tracing my steps along the same winding path. But everything looked different now, brighter, softer, more alive. The same stones, the same trees, the same air, yet they glowed as though touched by some unseen light. When I reached the entrance of the monastery, I paused and looked back at the forest. The wind moved gently through the leaves, creating ripples of motion that seemed to bow and wave. I bowed in return, silently thanking the path for another morning of lessons. As I stepped through the wooden gate, I felt the world grow quiet again. My sandals brushed against the stones, and I whispered inwardly, one step, one breath, one life. And with that, I continued forward, each gentle step carrying me deeper into the vast stillness that had always been walking beside me. The night had settled softly upon the monastery, wrapping the stone walls and wooden paths in a velvet hush. The lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, their golden light shimmering upon the quiet courtyard like fireflies caught between this world and the next. I sat near one of those lanterns, the same one that had guided me every evening for many years. Its flame had grown dim over time, its glow fragile, as if it too had learned the art of humility. Yet, tonight, it flickered with a peculiar rhythm, like it was breathing with me. That day had been long. Meditation, silence, sweeping the fallen leaves, carrying water from the stream. Each task had its rhythm, and I had followed it faithfully. But deep inside, a restlessness stirred. For weeks, my heart had felt unsettled, like a pond disturbed by invisible ripples. I could not understand why. I had walked the path of stillness for years. I had silenced my words, my cravings, my anger. And yet, something within me trembled in quiet discontent. When the abbot passed by, he paused beside me. His eyes, old and gentle, seemed to see right through the thin veil of peace I wore. "You are troubled," he said softly. "The silence outside you is not the same as the silence within." I bowed my head. "Master, I have practiced stillness for years. I listen to the wind. I observe my breath. I live without desire. Yet I feel an emptiness that will not dissolve." He smiled faintly. "Then your lantern has dimmed, not because it lacks oil, but because you have stopped tending to its light. Go to the old garden by the hill of the Bodhi tree. There you will find what has been forgotten." His words, as simple as falling leaves, stayed with me. That night, under the pale lantern glow, I took a small lamp in my hand and began walking toward the garden. The wind was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and rain-soaked earth. Each step on the gravel whispered like a prayer. The path curved through the bamboo grove, where the moonlight broke into slender pieces, dancing across my robe. When I reached the garden, everything was bathed in silver light. The Bodhi tree stood silent at the center, its roots like old hands gripping the earth, its leaves glimmering faintly as if whispering secrets to the stars. I placed my lantern beneath it and sat down, cross-legged, for a long time. I simply listened to the sound of the night insects, to the slow rhythm of my breath, to the space between one heartbeat and the next. The world seemed to pause around me, and in that pause, a quiet voice within asked, "Why do you seek peace as if it were somewhere else?" The question startled me. It didn't feel like a thought, was more like an echo rising from the core of my being. I realized that I had been treating peace as something to achieve, something to arrive at, like reaching a distant shore after a long swim. But peace was not the shore. It was the water itself. The longer I sat there, the more my thoughts softened, melting like snow under sunlight. Memories came and went, my younger days in the village, my first journey to the monastery, the faces of those I once loved and lost. Each image floated gently before dissolving into the darkness, leaving behind a strange tenderness. Hours must have passed. The moon had climbed higher, its light pooling upon the still pond nearby. I stood and walked toward it. The pond reflected the night sky perfectly, every star mirrored in its quiet surface. I gazed into it and saw not my face, but the flickering lantern behind me's flame steady, unwavering now, and in that reflection, I understood what my master meant. The lantern was not outside me. It was the heart itself. The light of awareness, of compassion, of truth had always been burning quietly inside, waiting to be remembered. Suddenly, a small wind brushed across the pond, rippling the reflection. The stars wavered, and for a moment, I saw my own eyes in the moving water. They were filled not with peace alone, but with understanding. Stillness, I realized, is not the absence of movement, is the harmony between motion and rest. It is the acceptance of what is without resistance. As I stood there, a faint sound reached my ears, the faint crackle of my lantern's flame. It was almost as if it was speaking a language older than words. I knelt beside it and whispered, "I see you now." And in that whisper, I felt something shift deep within me. My chest grew warm. A subtle pulse spread through my being, radiating like gentle waves from the center of my heart. Every breath felt luminous, sacred. The garden, the pond, the tree, all seemed alive, breathing in unison with me. A single leaf drifted down from the Bodhi tree and landed near my lamp. It glowed faintly in the golden light. I picked it up carefully and turned it in my fingers. Its veins were intricate, delicate like the patterns of life itself. Each line seemed to speak, "You are a part of this vastness. You do not need to become still. You are stillness." The night deepened. My mind no longer clung to the need for answers. I let go of every desire to understand and allowed myself to simply be. The lamp burned steadily, and I realized that its flame would one day fade. But the light it represented could never die. Before returning to my quarters, I looked once more at the sky. A soft mist had begun to rise, wrapping the garden in a silver veil. The moon shimmered faintly through it, like a pearl beneath clear water. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a profound gratitude for the breath in my lungs, for the soil beneath my feet, for the chance to awaken even for a single moment in this fleeting life. When I returned to the monastery courtyard, the abbot was still awake, sitting quietly by his own lantern. He looked up as I approached. "Did you find it?" he asked. I bowed deeply. "I did not find peace," I said, "but I found the one who was searching for it." He smiled, the kind of smile that could dissolve centuries of sorrow. "Then your lantern has been lit again." From that night on, my practice changed. I no longer sat in meditation to escape the noise within. I sat to listen to feel the sacred pulse that beats through every sound, every silence. When I swept the floors, I felt the movement of my breath guiding my broom. When I carried water, I heard the rhythm of the stream echoing in my veins. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when all the world slept, I would light my lantern again and watch its flame dance. It no longer flickered with uncertainty. It burned with the steady light of a Varnasa, reflection of the peace that no storm could extinguish. The years passed like falling petals. The abbot grew older and eventually left this world as gently as he had lived. On the night of his passing, I sat alone in the same courtyard, my lantern beside me. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a strange serenity. I felt his presence not as absence, but as light diffused through everything. And I understood then fully what the lantern of inner peace truly meant. It was not a symbol nor a metaphor. It was the living truth that the divine light within us never goes out. Even when our outer lamps fade and our bodies return to dust, that eternal flame continues to shine, guiding, healing, illuminating the endless path of awakening as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. I closed my eyes and let the warmth fill me. The world was new again. The lantern beside me glowed softly, and in that moment, I knew no longer needed it. The light had already found its home within. The morning sun rose like a whisper across the horizon, painting the mountains in soft gold and silver mist. I could hear the slow awakening of the monastery, the soft rustle of robes, the distant ringing of the prayer bell, the gentle sweep of brooms against the stone courtyard. Everything moved in harmony, as if life itself had learned to breathe in rhythm with the silence. Yet, within me, I felt a stillness that no morning sound could disturb, a stillness that had ripened over the years. Patient and eternal, I had grown old. My hair, once black as the raven's wing, had turned the color of winter frost. My hands, once steady and strong, now trembled slightly as I poured tea each morning. The faces around me had changed. Novices came with bright eyes and restless hearts, just as I once did. Many who had walked beside me had already passed beyond the veil. The abbot, my teacher, had become one with the silence long ago. His words still echoed within me like distant temple bells. The lantern of peace burns within. Guard it, not with fear, but with love. Each dawn I rose before the others and walked toward the garden where the old Bodhi tree still stood. Its roots had deepened, its branches widened, and each leaf shimmered with the same quiet life that once guided me to awakening. Beneath its shade, I had found stillness. Beneath it, I had found truth. And now, as the final season of my life approached, I returned there to prepare for what I had come to know as the eternal rest. The world was changing beyond the monastery walls. Travelers spoke of distant lands, wars, and cities filled with noise and light. But here, time moved like the wind over the hills, soft, unseen, yet always present. I did not fear death, for I had spent a lifetime learning how to die a little each day, dying to desire, to pride, to illusions. Death was no stranger. It was a patient friend waiting at the end of the path, ready to guide me home. That morning, I sat by the pond. The surface was still, mirroring the clouds above. My reflection looked back at me, wrinkled, gentle, unhurried. I smiled at the old monk in the water, realizing how many stories his eyes carried, stories of silence, loss, joy, awakening. "You've walked far," I whispered to him, "but the journey was never about distance, was it?" The reflection smiled back, and for a moment, I saw not myself, but the faces of everyone who had ever been part of my life. My parents, my brothers, the villagers who once laughed with me, the fellow monks who had shared this path. Each face dissolved into light, blending into the surface of the pond, until only one reflection remained: the sky itself, as the day grew warmer. A young novice approached, carrying a fresh lantern. His head was newly shaved, and his eyes gleamed with innocence. "Master," he said softly, "the abbot has asked me to bring this to you. He says it's time for the evening meditation." I accepted the lantern with trembling hands and smiled. "Tell him I will join when the sun touches the hills." The boy bowed and left. I placed the lantern beside me, though it was not yet dark. I watched its unlit form and thought of the countless nights it had illuminated, the shadows it had dissolved, the paths it had guided. A lantern needs no flame, I thought. If the heart itself burns with light. The wind began to move through the trees, slow and rhythmic, like the breath of the earth itself. I closed my eyes and followed that rhythm inward. My breath lengthened, deepened. I could feel every heartbeat, every whisper of air flowing through my lungs, every pulse of blood that had carried me through the years. Then something shifted. It was not sudden, not frightening, just a gentle loosening, like a leaf finally releasing itself from the branch. The boundaries between my body and the world began to dissolve. The coolness of the breeze no longer touched my skin, it moved through me. The sound of the rustling leaves was no longer outside, was me. I remembered the words my master once said: "When you stop trying to reach heaven, you realize you never left it." In that stillness, I understood. Heaven was not a place beyond the clouds, nor a distant paradise promised after death. Heaven was this moment, the quiet acceptance of everything as it is. The eternal rest I had sought was not sleep, not oblivion, but perfect harmony with all that exists. I sat longer. The birds sang above me. The sun began to lower, its golden light spilling gently through the branches. Each beam seemed to pass through my body, filling me with warmth and peace. My thoughts thinned, then vanished. The past no longer mattered, nor the future. There was only this endless, gentle now. I felt my breath, slow. In its place rose a light that seemed to come from within, spreading outward, filling the garden. It was not something I could see with my eyes. It was something I was. The same light I had seen in the lantern, the same flame that burned in every being, every blade of grass, every whisper of wind. I saw then that there had never been a division between life and death. What I had called death was merely the stillness between breaths, the moment the ocean draws back before another wave. There was no fear in it, only return when the first evening star appeared in the sky. I opened my eyes once more. The world shimmered softly. Everything glowed with the same sacred light, the stones, the trees, even the shadows. I felt tears on my cheeks, though I did not know why. They were not born of sadness, but of overwhelming love. I looked at the lantern beside me and reached out to light it one final time. My fingers shook slightly as the flame caught. It flared bright, then settled into a calm, steady glow. I watched it, breathing slowly, until the flame and my heartbeat seemed to move together as one. The sun slipped behind the hills. The pond mirrored the lantern's light, and for an instant, I saw my reflection again. But it was no longer old. It was young, radiant, and peaceful like the morning of the world. The young novice returned quietly. Seeing me there by the pond, he bowed deeply. "Master," he whispered, "the evening bell has rung." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I murmured, my voice soft as wind. "It has rung within me too." He hesitated, then sat beside me, folding his hands in prayer. The light of the lantern glowed between us, warm and alive. "Master," he asked, "what is eternal rest?" I turned my gaze toward the fading horizon. The first fireflies had begun to appear, flickering gently across the twilight air. "It is not sleep," I said. "It is awakening. It is when the river returns to the sea and realizes it was never separate." The boy's eyes filled with quiet wonder. "Will you come back after you rest?" I smiled again. "If the wind still moves, if the rain still falls, then your sigh will be there. In the rustle of leaves, in the light of your lantern, in the silence between your thoughts, I will never truly leave." The novice bowed again, his eyes glistening in the lantern's glow. I closed mine, feeling the peace expand like a vast sky within me. My breath grew light, my body weightless. And then there was no more boundary between myself and the world. I was the breeze. I was the pond. I was the flame. I was the quiet hum of life that connects all things. The young novice stayed by my side long into the night. The flame of the lantern burned steadily, never flickering once. When dawn came, the monks found us there. The old master was sitting as if in meditation, his face serene, his eyes gently closed. The lantern beside him still glowed softly, even though no oil remained. From that day, the novices tended the Bodhi tree with reverence. They spoke of how, on certain nights, when the wind moved through its branches, the leaves would shimmer with a faint golden light. And if one listened closely, they could hear a voice not from outside, but from within, whispering gently, "Be still. You are home." Years turned to decades. The monastery changed, and generations passed. But the lantern was never extinguished. Its flame, though unseen, lived on in every prayer, in every breath of peace that touched the hearts of those who came seeking the way. And somewhere beyond time, in a realm where light has no shadow, the old monk still sits beneath the eternal tree, smiling softly, forever one with the silence that is not emptiness, but fullness beyond measure. The eternal rest was not the end. It was the beginning without beginning, the awakening to the truth that the soul never sleeps. It only returns to the infinite embrace of being. The light, once lit, shines forever.